Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And in today's episode, I thought it would be a really great episode to do to talk about cutting clay because it's one of those things that when I started to making pottery, and I thought, I've cut things before, let's cut this clay. It's kind of sometimes it worked and sometimes I had like more like limited success with cutting clay and it kind of messed up the shape or something that I was making. So I thought what a great episode to do, just to tell you about some different utensils that I've used to cut clay with sort of more success, less success, and yeah, just kind of put them all here in this podcast episode. um okay, so why would you want to cut clay? So cutting clay is, well, it's one of those things that you probably need to do if you've got like a big, say like you've got a big bag of clay, you just want a bit of it. Yeah, you can sort of grab a bit off, whatever. But like cutting it is kind of is helpful because it kind of allows you to get the kind of size of bit you want straight away. Cut like half that bag up or something. Um, Another reason that you might want to cut clay is you might be making something, from a template or something. So you might be doing, say, like you're making a box and you've made a template, a cardboard template, and you can use that template to cut flat rolled out clay, and then you can stick those pieces of clay together and create like a piece. So another reason you might want to cut clay is you might have made a pot and you might want to cut it off the pottery wheel. So yeah, that's a really another way, another thing to use, another special thing we'll talk about in a minute to use to cut clay for in that context. Okay, another reason you might want to cut clay. So this is one of the reasons I use I cut clay, is that you might want to kind of straighten up like the rim of something. So for example, you might be making like say if like you slip cast something, and sometimes when you slip cast, you get all these like jaggedy edges because like where the clay's like dripped in and out around the rim of the mold or something. When that pot comes out of the mold, you might want to use, might want to to cut it to make the rim like really really sort of a clean line. Another reason you might want to cut clay is you might be making the same shape over and over again. So, for example, you might be creating a series of tiles that like tessellate together, or you might make coasters. I make coasters in my work. So, I need to cut out loads and loads of circles. And so, yeah, we can chat about some really good ways to do that. So let's get on to like cutting clay, what you can use, all the things. So three, four, five, six. I've got six things that you can use that I thought I'd tell you about that I've used to cut clay. So let's talk about the first one. So um, the first one is kind of real standard, like pottery studio piece of equipment. You've probably seen it. If you're going to evening classes, they'll have loads of these, and it's a cheese wire. So cheese wires are so helpful. They're basically of such a great tool for using to cut like big blocks of clay up. So say for example, you're getting clay out of the bin, the kind of in the evening classes, sometimes they have a big bin of clay and you can kind of, get stuff out, chop off the bit you want, and they're really, really good. So um they're also, yeah, great for chopping pots off the wheel. Some potters like have the pot spinning as they're chopping the pot off to try, I guess, try and get an even line or something. I found that quite difficult to do, so I basically just stop the wheel and then I just cut the pot, like throw a bit of water on there on the base to try and get that in between the pot and the thing I've cut, and I sort of cut it again a couple of times, and then I can slide the pot off the wheel. So cheese wires are really, really good, and for cutting a pot off the wheel, it's one of, yeah, it's the best thing. It's the best tool for that kind of situation. Okay, so that's number one. Okay, another thing that I've actually been using in my own pottery in a similar kind of way, if I'm trying to chop like big bits of clay up, is that I've used a dough chopper. Don't know if that's like the correct term, but like you can get these things that are for like bread making. And they're like they've got a big handle and they usually have quite a big sort of metal blade, but it's not a blade that's sharp really. It's more of a blade that's used just for sort of like squashing dough apart, sort of balls of dough. So sometimes you see like, chefs use them, pastry chefs using them, and they can be really effective in pottery because again, you can use them in the same way. Like clay's got a kind of similar, obviously similar kind of um, texture, viscosity to kind of dough sort of. So you can use like a dough chopper, and I've seen plastic ones of these as well, but I think probably a metal one would be very robust and you can use it for clay. So I've been using that to chop clay up as well. I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make a stoneware pottery glaze. So, if you've never made a glaze before, or if you make loads of glazes and you just want a recipe, this guide is for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's available via the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. The other really good thing actually about a dough chopper is that you can use it for scraping. So if you're kind of reclaiming clay and stuff, you can use that to sort of, if you've been wedging clay and there's, kind of slightly wet clay everywhere, you can use the dough chopper also to kind of scrape a large surface all at once. So they are a really good tool to use in pottery. Um, okay, so let's get on to if you were kind of chopping out shapes. So the first thing to say is if you're chopping shapes up from clay, um, it's really good to, from rolled out clay, a nice flat piece of clay ready to like chop up into tiles or, pieces to make, to kind of put together to make something, to hand build something. Um, it's really good to do this when clay is leather hard. So it's just much more robust in the sense that you don't get that kind of drag on it when you're trying to chop clay. Sometimes it's like if it's very soft, it will kind of distort the shape of it and stuff. So leather hard clay is the best stage to use. It's the best clay stage when you're chopping clay. Yeah, you really want it to be leather hard. If it's any kind of harder than leather hard, it can sort of like break the clay, like crack it. So it's quite a it's kind of I guess a matter of like rolling it out. I usually just roll clay out when I'm making coasters. I roll the clay out and I kind of lay it on a tea towel because rolling cloths are really good when you're rolling clay out. You can roll it on a cloth and then it means you can manipulate the clay much better, peel it off the cloth. It's not going to get stuck to the table. Um, and so like I roll it out on the cloth and then the cloth, I sort of leave it on there. The cloth kind of helps to absorb some of that water and helps to kind of harden the clay out. And what I do is I just kind of like will just go back to it every so often and just like see how hard it is. It doesn't take that long to dry into the kind of dryness you want, but it's just a much more robust like stage of clay to then cut it. It's much easier to cut. So okay, so for this stage, if you're cutting shapes out, you could use a knife. Just you can get these potter's knives, or you could use a normal sort of butter knife from the kitchen drawer or something. But the thing with knives is that what I found when I cut with knives is they often like drag the clay. I don't know, something kind of weird like happens where it's kind of suctions the clay into the side of the knife and you're kind of like dragging it. And quite often it can kind of drag your pot, like drag the kind of thing you're cutting, like distort it a bit. So, um, another thing with a knife is that you wouldn't really be able to cut like a pot that you'd slip cast with a knife. I mean, you might be able to if you kind of scraped away bits of layers of it. But if you were kind of just, if you just like got your pot, grabbed it, tried to like chop it with a knife, it would very likely warp it. We like slip castware is kind of generally like can be like a little bit thinner than other pottery. And so, if you're kind of trying to chop it with a knife, if you're trying to chop a mug with a knife, it's probably going to like distort. And so, yeah, it's kind of, but yeah, like I said, you probably could scrape little bits off the rim or something with a knife. Um, so yeah, so a knife's a possibility. But if you're wanting to make loads of like shapes over and over again, um, then then a tile cutter is a really good option. So you can actually get tile cutters from like pottery suppliers. So this is what I use for my coasters and that I make. And like it's really cool. It's like basically like a kind of how to describe it, like a kind of like a stamp, but a really big stamp. And you get them in loads of different sizes. You can get square ones, you can get rectangle ones, circle ones. I got a circle one. And you basically press it into a piece of clay that's flat, rolled out, leather hard, and then you can kind of push the clay out of like the shape. It's like kind of popping it out basically, pushes it out, and then you're left with your shape. And they're really really good. Nothing beats them really for cutting out circles. You couldn't, well, you could cut a circle out with a knife, definitely, but it'd just take a really long time. It'd be really hard to get an even shape. So, tile pressers are absolutely fantastic for that job. And they just enable you to make, to cut loads and loads of shapes really quickly. They're absolutely brilliant. Um, yeah. Okay. So another way of cutting clay that's flat rolled out, say you were going to say you wanted to cut out like different shapes. You've got like some kind of cardboard like templates. You laid them on your flat piece of rolled out clay, and you thought, oh, I could use a knife, but it's dragging a bit. What I found, this is such a good pottery hack, is that pizza cutting wheels, are actually amazing for cutting clay. And I think that's something to do with the direction of the fact that they're sort of cutting down and then they're lifting up at the same time. You don't have that kind of drag that you have with a knife. They're actually so good for cutting clay. Really quick. You can just have a like maybe like a ruler to like run it against, to make sure you get a nice straight line. And you just like, yeah, like sort of whiz the wheel up the ruler edge, of the bit you want to cut, and you get just like a perfectly straight line really quickly. They're so good for cutting clay. They're less kind of good, I suppose, at doing like intricate like corners because they're quite like a big blunt tool. But you could just, move the ruler then to the next side and then cut it like down like that. So yeah, they are so, so good. If you're cutting big, straight shapes, then a pizza wheel, nothing beats a pizza wheel. Pizza wheel? Pizza cutting wheel. They're so, so good. Okay, and then we're coming to like the final way of cutting clay that I use in my own pottery all the time. And this is something I mean, I don't know, probably maybe this is a standard way of cutting clay, I don't know, but I thought one day I had a cup that I'd cast and I thought, I don't know how to cut the rim. Don't really know how to make this rim like all nice. And I use paper clay when I cast in slip. So the clay is really strong. And I thought, I wonder if I could just cut it with a pair of scissors. And so that's what I started doing. I started just using sort of craft scissors. They're not that sharp. They don't have to be that sharp because they're kind of in a way they're kind of crushing the clay rather than like actually cutting it as it were. But I just use the scissors to like cut around the rim of my mugs. And it is so good. It's much easier to control. Like I said, you don't squash your pot as you're doing it because you're kind of, you can hold it, the scissors kind of pressing evenly from both sides. And they just, yeah, especially with paper clay, they work so well. So you probably could try this. If you don't have something that's laid down, and has the strength from being on a surface, a hard surface, say like for example, you have a big laid out, piece of clay that you've rolled out, that is going to get strength from the kind of the base that you're cutting it on. If you're cutting something, so you can use a knife or a pizza wheel, in those instances, or a tile cutter. If you've got something which has got intricate edges, which you've already built it, and you need to cut it, you'll need to cut a straight edge or something, like a mug rim, then that's kind of up in the air, then yeah, it's very delicate and it's very easy to like squash that pot. So scissors are amazing. So yeah, that's my like absolute top tip for cutting kind of rims of pots and stuff. A pair of scissors works amazingly well, especially if your clay has paper fibers in. So I've said this before on the podcast, but like I use bamboo kitchen roll. I use 7 sheets for about 5 liters of casting slip. I just kind of mush it up and then like whiz it into the clay, mush it up with a stick blender, drain it off, and then I just zhuzh it into the clay with a paddle mixer, and it works so well. It really makes the clay like super, super strong. So yeah, right. So those are my top tips for cutting clay. So like we'll just do a little summary. You can cut it with a cheese wire, a dough cutter, a tile cutter, a knife, a pizza wheel, and a pair of scissors. Depending on the context of what you're cutting and, you know, where you're cutting it, how you want it cut, what you're doing. So yeah, those are all the things I've tried to cut clay in my pottery. And until the next episode, wishing you very, very happy potting and really looking forward to seeing you then. And take care. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.